Hello everyone and welcome to Raquel Teaches Code. My name is Raquel and in today's lesson I'm going to teach you how to work with an API using JavaScript to display data on a web page. So let's get started. Alrighty. So the API that we're going to be working with today is the Quotable API. It's a free API available to everyone. You can, right here, I'm showing you what it looks like on its GitHub repository. And when you scroll down to the README file for this API, it tells you exactly what it does. That Quotable is a free open source quotations API. It was originally built as a part of a free code camp project. I love free code camp, by the way. And if you're interested in contributing, you can please check out the contributor's guide. And then it goes on to give you information on the limits for usage, the URL for the API server, which is what we're going to be using today in our project, and other ways that you can test out and try out the API application. So Quotable is what we're going to be using today for our project. Okay. And so what I'm going to do now is just switch over to the code editor. And so for today, we're going to be creating 3 files. We're going to keep them all in the same folder, and this is what we're going to use for our project. So I've already gone ahead and created a folder on my computer, and I'm just going to create 3 blank files to start, and then we'll add the stuff to it. I'll explain as we go along, and then we'll test it out. We'll check for errors, and we'll see how this all works out. But the goal of this project is to be able to display a random quote on a web page, both when the page is initially loaded and then when we click a button to generate a new random quote. So let's get started. I'm going to go ahead and create the files first. I'm going to create a HTML file. I'm just going to call it index.html. I'm going to create a style sheet, so I'll just go ahead and call that style.css. And then I'm going to create a script file. I'll just go ahead and call that script.js. So we have our 3 files set up. Again, they all need to be in the same folder to just make this easy to work and understand. All right, so let's start with adding the content to our page in our HTML file. So let me just get my notes together here. The first thing we're going to do is that we're going to do the basics of creating a HTML file, which is, the doc type. And we're going to start with the opening HTML tag. So we're going to set the language to English. I'm going to put our closing angle bracket there. And I like to always add my head elements and put a space between the head element and the body element for my pages and then fill them in as needed. So for the head, we're going to add some metadata here. We're going to first use the meta tag to set the character set using the char set attribute. And we're going to set that to UTF-8. Then we're going to add a title to the page, and I'm just going to call this random quote generator because that's what this is doing. And then finally, we're going to link the style sheet to the page using the link element with the set the attributes for the rel and for the location of the style sheet, which is again in the same folder that all these other files are located. Okay, and we're going to save that. Always save your changes as you go along. All right, and now we're going to add the content to the page within the body element. So let's first start out with a div. And I know I've talked before about not using divs, of trying to use semantic elements, but for today, we're going to use a div. Just do as I say, not as I do. All right, so we're going to use a div. And within that div, we're going to insert a heading. So this heading, I'm just going to call it random quotes. Okay. And then after the heading, I'm going to add a paragraph. And that paragraph is going to say, click the button to get a quote. Right. And then we're going to add a button because, of course, we're given instructions to click a button. So naturally, we should also provide a button. So let's just add a button here. It's going to say get a new quote on it. All right. And then after the div element is where we want to insert the link to connect to our JavaScript files, right? Our JavaScript script or our script created in JavaScript, however you want to call it. So here we're going to use the script element, right? And indicate with the source attribute using an equal sign, of course, not what I just did, the name of the JavaScript file. All right, we have a closing arrow script. This is one of the reasons why I love Visual Studio Code. It will automatically generate closing tags for you, which is always nice because sometimes we just tend to forget stuff. So there it is. We have the basic framework for the content of our web page. But one other thing that we're going to do here with some of the elements is that we're going to label them because we need to be able to access them both with our style sheet and with our JavaScript file. And so to label some of these elements, we're going to use some classes. We're going to use a class and we're going to use an ID. So the first class that we're going to assign is going to be to the div element. Okay, so in the div element, we're going to give that a class name of container. Again, use this equal sign, not the plus sign like I do. I'm just going to type the word container. And then for the paragraph element, I'm going to give that an ID. All right. And I'm going to give that an ID of quote. So I'm going to click within the paragraph element, type the word ID equal, and that's going to have the name of quote. And then the button element is also going to have an ID. So for the button element, I'm going to give that an ID of new quote. I know, very creative and original, I know. I'm going to go ahead and save that. So, you know, one of the things I always stress when you're doing web development is check your work as you go along. So what I'm going to do right here is I'm just going to open a browser to be able to view this HTML just to make sure that it looks as expected before styling. So let me go ahead to the browser and I'm just going to open a new tab. Let's open this file. And that is not where I have it saved. I have it in here, right? All right, and that looks as expected, right? It has the heading, it has the paragraph text, it has a button. Button doesn't do anything, of course, because we haven't created anything for it to do yet. But it looks as expected, so let's keep going. So far, so good. All right, so now the next thing I want to do, and what I always like to do, is I like to do the style sheet next. So let's go ahead and work on the style sheet. So we're going to create styles for both the body of the page and as well as the element that is labeled as the container. Okay, so let's start with styling the body. So we're going to indicate the body element as the first thing we're going to create styles for. And we're going to set a few basic things. So we're going to set the font family to Arial, which is something that is on most computers. And if you don't have Arial installed, our fallback is going to be a sans serif font. Okay, so we have that. Then we're going to set the display property to flex. And that is wrong because that should be a semicolon. There we go. We're going to set the height. We're going to set the justify content property, and we're going to set that to center. We are going to set the align items property also to center. Oops, that should not be there. That should not be. There you go. And then I'm going to set a background color. And I think I've mentioned this before. I like pink and all kinds of variations of pink. So today I'm going to select a hot pink color because I can and I think it's cute. All right. So the styling for the body element is done. And now what I'm going to do is I'm going to style the element that has the class name of container. So remember that when we are styling a class name, we always want to start that with a period first and then the name of the class. So let's go ahead and put that. The container is what we want to style. And I'm going to add just a few styles to this. So the text align style is going to have a value of center. Background color is just going to be plain old white. And again, you don't have to select these colors. You can pick whatever colors you like, even mess around and do a gradient in image, who knows? Do whatever you like, do what you like, as people like to say back in the day. So we're going to set a value for the padding. Okay. And we're going to do the border radius to give it a little bit of a curve to the area. We'll just set that to 8 pixels. And then we're going to give it a little bit of a box shadow. Okay, and those values are going to be 0, 4, 8, not 9, 8. And then the color that I'm going to set is going to be a darker color. So I'm gonna just, again, name it. I'm not looking for any hex codes. I like to do dark gray, and I'm not sure why when you put dark gray actually looks light. So I'm gonna go ahead and select dark slate gray because I think that looks nice. And I'm gonna go ahead and save that. So now, once again, we're gonna check our progress in the page and then we'll go on to do the JavaScript. So let's go back to here. Let's refresh the page. And okay, it's looking very nice so far, right? Button still doesn't work, but I think it looks pretty decent. Some of you might think the hot pink is too much, but I think it's just right. It's beautiful. All right, so let's get back to our code editor. And now what we're going to do is we are going to set up the JavaScript. This is where the magic is going to happen. Excuse me, and this is where we're going to make sure everything works as expected. So, and we're also going to make sure that we can check for errors if it does, in the event that it doesn't work. So let's start off with telling the script what elements we're going to be working with within the HTML document. So I'm going to do that by starting off with creating some constants here. One constant I'm going to create, I'm going to call it quote element. And the that's going to be the location. That's going to be a location. So see, these first two constants are going to be a location in the HTML document of what we're going to be working with, or where we're going to be working at. So we're going to use document dot get element by ID, a very popular method, and we're going to use the quote location. Okay. The other constant we're going to create, I'm just going to call it button, and that location is going to be also using get element by ID, and that location will be new quotes. And just as a refresher, let's go back to the HTML document so you can be familiar with what I'm doing here. So remember that we're working with the area called quote as indicated here and the area called new quote as indicated there. Okay, so let's go back to the JavaScript. So now what I'm going to do is start working with the API. And so in order to start working with the API, we're going to fetch or get data from the API. We're going to convert that data into an object that can be used by JavaScript, and then we're going to extract what we need from that data to be able to place it and display it on the HTML page. And the function we're going to create is going to do all that. So we're going to be using an asynchronous function. So let's start with creating the function. We're going to use the keyword async here, of course, the word function, and we're going to give it a name. So I'm going to call it fetch quotes. Okay, and we're going to do these brackets here. And then we're going to insert the word try, another set of curly braces. And so this next line, what it's going to do is going to actually send the GET request to the API. So we're going to create this constant here, res, and we're going to use the keyword await, fetch, which is doing exactly what it sounds like. It's fetching this data. And we're going to put in the API that is for I'm sorry, we're going to insert the URL for the API we're working with. So this is going to be the URL that is needed to access the quotable API. And so this is it right here. And again, you can get this from the GitHub repo for the API. And I will also provide this in the description once I upload all this and make it beautiful. All right, so this is the GET request for that, right? And then what we're going to do is once the response is received, we're going to convert that response into something that's usable by JavaScript, which is going to be data in JSON format. So what we're going to do is we're going to create one more constant, right? And I'm going to call this constant quote data, right? And it's going to be equal to the response converted using the res.json method, okay? Remember, everything ends with a semicolon in JavaScript. And now what we're going to do is the function is going to replace the existing code. Because remember, at the beginning of this project, I said that when this page is loaded, there will be a random quote already there. And then when you click the button, it's going to replace the existing one with a new random quote. So this next line is going to do exactly that. It's going to replace the existing quote on the page with a new quote. So let's go ahead and do that. So we're going to use quote element with the text content method, right? And that's going to be set equal to parts of the data separated by a hyphen. And now one of the things you're going to remember is you're going to need to know is that Some people tend to put the single quotes, and that is a mistake. What you want to use that slightly slanted single quote, and that's usually on the same key as the tilde key. For most people, it's in the upper left corner of your keyboard. So just make sure you use that slanted single quote. I'm sure there's a correct name for it. I just don't know what it is. So I call it the slanted single quote. All right. And within there, we're going to put a set of double quotes. And then within that, we're going to start inserting the data that's going to be displayed on the page in that area. So we're going to start with the $ to quote that value. And the first value that we're going to insert is the actual content of the quote. So that one is indicated by quote data.contents, right? And we're going to put that curly brace there. And then after that double quote, but before the closing slanted single quote, we're going to put a hyphen, and then we're going to put another $. We're going to put a set of curly braces in there, and we're going to put quote data dot author. All right. And then we're going to put a semicolon at the end of that. So what this is doing is it's going to replace that area with this information here. The content hyphen the author. The content being the actual random quote, and the author, of course, exactly what it sounds like, the author of that quote. All right. And so now that we've done that part of displaying the random quote, we're also going to add in something to be able to help us if there are any errors that occurred. So this is going to be some simple error handling that I'm going to insert in here. All right, so after this closing curly brace for the try method, we're going to use the keyword catch, and we're going to insert error here. And we're going to do another set of curly braces. And in here, we're going to insert a message to be displayed when there's an error, and we're also going to make sure that this error message, error type also is going to be able to be visible in the console log. All right. So let's display it on the page. We're going to do quote element dot text content again. All right. And we're going to set that equal to could not fetch quote. All right. That makes sense. That's what you're going to see. And then we're also going to make sure that it will console error that thing. And we're going to use the error that we created earlier that we've been working with here. All right, so now this function is created, right? So the idea here is going to get the data, convert it, pull out the info we need, and display it in the web page in the area that we indicate. And now the last part of this is that we're going to make sure of two things. We're going to make sure that a random quote is actually generated when we first load the page, and also we're going to make sure that the button works by adding an event listener to the button. And so what an event listener is, it is a function that allows you to assign a certain type of event to trigger something. Meaning you can say, hey, when something happens on this element, do this. And so what the kind of event that we're going to assign to the button is going to be called a click event. And when that click event happens, it will trigger the running of the function that we just created. So first, let's do that. Let's add the event listener to the button. So we're going to add some space between the function and the event listener. And this is how we add the event listener. We're going to use button and the method add event listener, right? And the event, like I said, is going to be a click. We're going to use a comma here. And then we're going to tell it what to run when that click is, when that click happens. And then finally, we want to make sure that a random quote is actually loaded, is actually generated and displayed on the page when it's loaded. So we're going to call the function. Okay. So this is all it takes to create. So now what we're going to do is we're going to test, right? We're going to test a few things. We're going to test to see, first of all, that it actually displays a random quote when the page is loaded, that the button works to generate and replace the existing code. And then we're going to make a change to the JavaScript file to try to trigger an error to see if we can get the error message that we created in our error handling here. So let's go and see. Let's go back to the page, and what we're going to do is refresh and then try to test it out. So the first thing we should see is a random quote. Let's see if it works. Isn't she lovely? Isn't that a beautiful thing? It worked. Yay. All right. So, well, at least the first part worked, right? It loaded a random quote when we loaded the page. Now let's see if the button works. So let's click the button. And sure enough, it works. And we can keep clicking it all day long, and it'll keep generating a random quote. Wonderfulness. Now let's test to see what happens when that doesn't work, right? So what I'm going to do, I'm just going to go back to the JavaScript file, and I'm going to just add some kind of error into the URLs, because what that should do once we save that, I'm just going to slightly change the URL, and what that should do is generate an error when we try to load the page again. So let's go back to the page, reload it, refresh it, and see what happens. All right, refresh, and wonderful. It says could not fetch quote. Get a new quote. All right, so the error handling works. And also, let's see what's displayed in the console when this happens. So let's actually go here, and you should be able to go, you should right click on the page and click on inspect. And if you go to the console tab and go to the user messages, you should see the messages generated by the JavaScript file, right? And you see failed to fetch, failed to fetch. It failed to fetch just to load the quote, and it failed to fetch when the button was clicked, right? So awesome, it works exactly as expected. So let me go back and fix that mistake so that the application works again. Because this, by the way, is an application. Let's go back one more time, refresh this, and wonderfulness. So this is how you create a random quote generator. This is how you work with an API to be able to display data on a web page. So I hope that you found this useful. If you have any comments or questions, please feel free to post them below. The description for this video will contain a link to the API as well as a link to my GitHub repository with a copy of this code. And I'm looking forward to seeing you on my next tutorials. Hope you enjoy. Please be sure to share this video with anyone that you think might find it useful. Take care and God bless.